In 1957, the German Federal Post Office needed a new delivery vehicle. Their fleet of three-wheeled tempo vans was aging out of production, and they needed something small enough to navigate narrow village streets, cheap enough to buy in bulk, and reliable enough to run 6 days a week in every kind of weather Germany could throw at it. What they got was a tiny van powered by a two-stroke engine smaller than most modern motorcycles, with a rear-mounted air-cooled twin that overheated so regularly in summer that postal workers developed their own unofficial cooling stop schedules between deliveries. And yet, the Deutsche Bundespost ordered over 2,000 of them. The Danish Postal Service bought them too. Private businesses across Europe filled their fleets with them. The Goggomobil TL became one of the most successful micro-commercial vehicles ever produced, not because it was powerful or refined, but because it was tiny, cheap, and good enough at the one job it was built to do. This is the story of the little van that overheated constantly, delivered millions of letters, and now sells at auction for more than a new Mercedes. The Goggomobil TL did not come from an automaker. It came from a company that made agricultural equipment. Hans Glas GmbH was founded in the Bavarian town of Dingolfing as a manufacturer of farm machinery. For decades, that was the business. Tractors, plows, harvesting equipment. The kind of industrial hardware that kept rural Bavaria running. But after the war, the company pivoted toward personal transportation, recognizing that devastated post-war Germany needed affordable mobility more than it needed new farm tools. The country's infrastructure had been shattered, people needed to move, and the established automakers were not yet producing vehicles that ordinary workers could afford. In 1951, Glas launched the Goggo scooter, named after the grandson of company founder Hans Glas. The boy's nickname was Goggo, and it stuck to the product. The scooter was a commercial success, selling well enough to establish Glas as a manufacturer capable of building motorized vehicles, not just agricultural machinery. It proved that the company could design, manufacture, and sell consumer products at scale, and it gave them the confidence to try something significantly more ambitious. By 1955, Glas made the leap to 4 wheels with the Goggomobil T sedan. It was a true microcar in every sense of the word. A 2-door, 4-passenger vehicle powered by a rear-mounted, air-cooled, 2-stroke, 2-cylinder engine displacing just 245 cc and producing approximately 13.6 horsepower. It had independent suspension all around with coil springs and swing axles, hydraulic brakes, and a 4-speed manual gearbox with an optional Getrag electromagnetic pre-selector transmission. It was small, slow, and made of compromises from bumper to bumper, and it was an enormous commercial success. Nearly 220,000 sedans and over 6,000 coupes were built between 1955 and 1969. In a post-war Germany hungry for affordable personal transport, the Goggomobil filled a gap that the larger manufacturers simply had not addressed. It was cheap to buy, cheap to run, and small enough to park anywhere. For hundreds of thousands of German families, the Goggomobil was their first car. Not their dream car, their first car. And that distinction matters because the success of the sedan is what gave Glas the confidence and the manufacturing capacity to try something even more unusual, a commercial vehicle based on the same tiny platform. The Goggomobil TL debuted at the IFMA trade show in Frankfurt in 1956. The letters TL stood for Transporter Lieferwagen, which translates essentially to delivery van. And it was immediately clear that this was not a conventional commercial vehicle by any standard. The TL was built on the Goggomobil sedan's platform, sharing its wheelbase of just 1,800 mm, barely 70.9 inches, and much of its mechanical underpinnings. The overall length was 2,110 mm, that is 114 inches, shorter than many modern compact cars, but where the sedan carried passengers. The TL carried cargo in a tall, boxy body that maximized every available cubic centimeter of interior volume above and around the mechanical components. The engineering compromises were obvious from the start, and Glass did not try to hide them. Because the engine was rear-mounted, the cargo area had to be designed around the engine compartment, which intruded into the load, space, and reduced the usable volume. The tiny wheelbase meant that fitting more than 2 side doors was impractical, so Glass used sliding doors instead. This was actually a clever solution, because it meant the van could operate in narrow alleys and tight parking spaces without needing room to swing a conventional door open. In the dense medieval street layouts of German towns and villages, that was a genuine practical advantage. At the rear, double doors provided access to the cargo area for loading and unloading. A flatbed version with an open bed and optional tarpaulin cover was also produced for businesses that needed to carry bulky or oddly shaped loads that would not fit inside the enclosed van body. The initial TL250 used the same 247cc two-stroke twin as the sedan, producing around 15 horsepower. Later variants expanded the range. The TL300 received a 296cc engine producing 15 horsepower and 23 Nm of torque. The TL400 got a larger 395cc engine producing 18.5 horsepower and 32 Nm. The increases sound modest because they were modest. But the curb weight of the TL was just 460 kg, which allowed a payload capacity of 440 kg. The van could carry nearly its own weight in cargo. That ratio of payload to vehicle weight was genuinely impressive for any commercial vehicle, let alone one powered by an engine you could probably lift out of the chassis by hand. Top speed ranged from 65 km/h for the TL250 to 75 km/h for the TL400. That is 40 to 47 miles per hour. These were not fast vehicles by any definition of the word, but they were not designed for speed. They were designed for the last mile. The narrow streets, cobblestone lanes, and village roads where larger delivery trucks simply could not operate efficiently. And it was that specific capability that caught the attention of the most important customer the Goggomobil TL would ever have. The contract that made the Goggomobil TL famous and that kept the production line running for nearly a decade came from the Deutsche Bundespost, the German Federal Post Office. The Bundespost had been using 3-wheeled Tempo delivery vans for their urban and rural mail routes, but the Tempo was going out of production and no direct replacement was available. The Postal Service needed a vehicle that met very specific requirements. It had to be small enough for village deliveries on streets that were never designed for motor vehicles. It had to be cheap enough to order in quantities of thousands. And it had to be mechanically simple enough that postal workshops staffed by general mechanics, not specialist technicians, could maintain and repair them without difficulty. Glass adapted the Goggomobil TL to meet the postal specifications, and the Bundespost placed an order for over 2,000 vehicles. It was the largest single order in the Goggomobil TL's entire production history, and it transformed the van overnight from a niche commercial product into one of the most familiar vehicles on German streets. The postal TLs were painted in the Bundespost's distinctive yellow livery and became one of the most recognizable delivery vehicles of the late 1950s and 1960s across the country. If you lived in a German town during that era, you saw a yellow Goggomobil TL delivering your mail. It was as much a part of daily life as the letters it carried. The Bundespost was not the only postal service to adopt the TL. The Danish Postal Service also purchased Goggomobil TLs for their own delivery routes, extending the van's reach beyond Germany's borders. Between 1957 and 1965, a total of 3,667 Goggomobil TLs were produced across all variants. Of those, over 2,000 went directly to the Postal Service. That means more than half of every Goggomobil TL ever built spent its working life delivering mail. The van was not just used by the post office, it was, in a very real sense, built for the post office. But the Goggomobil TL had a persistent, well-documented problem that every owner and operator knew about. It overheated regularly, and not occasionally or under extreme circumstances. It overheated as a matter of routine, particularly during the summer months when the combination of ambient heat and demanding duty cycles pushed the little engine past its thermal limits. The root cause was straightforward engineering. The two-stroke air-cooled engine was mounted at the rear of the vehicle, enclosed in a compartment that provided limited airflow even under the best conditions. In the sedan version, this arrangement was manageable because the car was light, rarely fully loaded, and typically moving at speeds that generated adequate cooling air across the engine fins. But the TL was a working vehicle operating under fundamentally different conditions. It carried 440 kilos of payload. It stopped and started constantly on delivery routes. It idled at addresses while the driver sorted and delivered packages. And in summer, the combination of heavy loads, low speeds, frequent stops, and warm ambient temperatures pushed the little air-cooled twin consistently beyond its thermal limits. The problem was particularly acute in urban delivery work, which was exactly the application the Bundespost had purchased 2,000 of them for. A postal worker making stops every 50 to 100 meters, idling or crawling between addresses in July heat, was essentially asking the engine to work at near maximum output, with minimal cooling airflow passing over it. The result was predictable: overheating, loss of power, and the need to stop the vehicle entirely and let the engine cool before continuing the route. Postal workers reportedly developed their own informal routines around the problem, timing their delivery routes to include natural cooling breaks at shaded locations or spacing out their stops to allow the engine brief recovery windows between high-load periods. The TL400's larger engine helped somewhat. The additional displacement meant the engine was less stressed at any given workload, generating less heat per unit of power delivered. But the fundamental cooling limitation, a rear-mounted air-cooled engine in an enclosed compartment with inadequate ventilation, was never fully resolved during the vehicle's entire production life. And here is the engineering irony that makes this story worth telling. The overheating issue was a direct consequence of the TL's greatest advantage: its size. A larger engine compartment with better ventilation ducting and more surface area for heat dissipation would have required a larger vehicle body. A larger vehicle body would have required a longer wheelbase. A longer wheelbase would have made the van wider and heavier. And a wider, heavier van would have defeated the entire purpose of building a micro-delivery vehicle designed specifically for the tight spaces that larger trucks could not navigate. Glass understood this trade-off and chose to live with the thermal compromise rather than sacrifice the compactness that made the TL useful in the first place. The post office apparently agreed because they kept ordering them despite the overheating. While the Bundespost was the TL's largest and most important customer, private businesses across Europe also adopted the little van for their own delivery and service operations. Bakeries, florists, pharmacies, and small retailers used TLs for local deliveries where a full-sized van would have been expensive overkill. The vehicle's low purchase price, minimal fuel consumption, and tiny street footprint made it economical for any business that needed to move small quantities of goods across short distances within towns and cities. It was the last-mile delivery vehicle of its era, decades before. That phrase became a logistics industry buzzword. An Americanized version, the TL400, was produced to meet U.S. road safety and emissions requirements. It used the larger 392cc engine with an automatic gas oil mixer, a convenience feature that eliminated the need for the driver to manually mix two-stroke fuel and oil before filling the tank. American buyers were far less accustomed to this process than their European counterparts, and the automatic mixer removed a significant barrier to adoption. However, very few TL400s were actually exported to the United States, and the model remains extremely rare in North America today. Finding one is essentially a collector's treasure hunt. The TL was also produced in Australia by Buckle Motors in Sydney, which assembled Goggomobiles under license for the Australian market. The Australian vehicles served similar light commercial roles, though in significantly smaller numbers than their German counterparts. The global reach of a microcar built by a former agricultural equipment manufacturer in a Bavarian town is, in itself, a remarkable footnote in automotive history. The story of the Goggomobil TL is inseparable from the story of the company that built it. And that story ends with one of the most significant acquisitions in German automotive history. By the mid-1960s, Hans Glas GmbH was struggling financially. The microcar market that had sustained the company through the economic recovery of the 1950s was shrinking rapidly as Germany's prosperity grew and buyers moved toward larger, more conventional, more powerful cars. The Goggomobil had been perfect for a country rebuilding from rubble. It was less compelling. In a country that could now afford Volkswagens and Opels, Glas had attempted to move up market with larger models, including the Glas 14, the 1304, and a GT Coupe that was actually a well-regarded sports car in its own right. But the investments required to develop and produce these more complex vehicles strained the company's limited resources. The transition from microcars to mainstream automobiles required capital that Glas simply did not have. In 1966, BMW acquired Hans Glas GmbH. The primary motivation was not the Goggomobil or any of Glas's existing products. It was the factory. BMW needed additional manufacturing capacity to support its own growing production volumes, and the Glas plant in Dingolfing provided exactly that. BMW continued producing Goggomobiles briefly after the acquisition, but production of the entire range ended on June 30, 1969. The Dingolfing factory was converted to BMW production, and today it is one of BMW's largest and most important manufacturing facilities in the world. The factory that once produced 15-horsepower microcars with overheating problems now builds 7 Series sedans, 8 Series coupes, and electric I-Series vehicles. The Goggomobil TL had already ended production in 1965, 2 years before the BMW takeover. But the irony remains vivid. The factory floor where postal workers' tiny delivery vans were once assembled by hand is now the birthplace of 6-figure luxury cars that would have been inconceivable to the engineers who designed the TL. Given that the Goggomobil TL was a working commercial vehicle with a typical commercial vehicle lifespan, meaning it was used hard, maintained minimally, and scrapped without ceremony when it became uneconomical to repair. Very few examples have survived to the present day. Of the 3,667 TLs produced, the vast majority were driven into the ground during their working lives and then sent to the scrapyard. Nobody in 1965 thought a tiny postal van with an overheating problem was worth preserving. The surviving examples are rare enough that they command extraordinary prices at auction. Prices that would have been absolutely unimaginable to the postal workers who drove them or the mechanics who cursed at their cooling systems. The Bruce Weiner Microcar Museum in the United States owned 4 Goggomobil TLs at its peak, making it one of the largest collections of the model anywhere in the world. When the museum's collection was auctioned by R.M. Sotheby's in 2013, the TLs sold for between $92,000 and $170,500 each. A vehicle that cost a fraction of a Volkswagen Beetle when it was new was now selling for more than a brand new Mercedes-Benz E-Class. The collector market for Goggomobil TLs is driven by the same factors that drive all microcar collecting: extreme rarity, distinctive visual character, and the sheer charm of a vehicle so small and so improbable that it seems like it should not exist as a real, functional machine. A Goggomobil TL in Deutsche Bundespost yellow livery, restored to original postal specification with the correct markings and equipment, is one of the most desirable microcars in the world. And the postal connection adds a layer of cultural significance that pure sports cars and luxury vehicles simply do not carry. These were working vehicles that served a public function. They delivered letters and parcels to millions of German households during the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle years that transformed post-war Germany. That history resonates with collectors in a way that raw performance statistics never could. The Goggomobil TL was never a great vehicle by any conventional measure. It was underpowered, it overheated, its cargo capacity was limited by an engine compartment that intruded into the load space. Its top speed would barely keep up with modern city traffic. By the standards of any era, including its own, it was a compromise from end to end. Every design decision traded one limitation for another, and the engineers at Glass knew it. But it worked. Over 2,000 of them delivered mail. Across Germany for nearly a decade, they navigated cobblestone lanes that larger vans physically could not enter. They carried 440 kg of cargo on engines smaller than a modern motorcycle. They climbed Bavarian hills in summer heat with full loads of parcels and letters and packages addressed to every household on the route. And when they overheated, the postal workers waited, let them cool down, and kept going. That was the deal. That was always the deal. And the post office accepted it because the alternative was a larger vehicle that could not do the job the TL was built for. The Goggomobil TL is a reminder that automotive history is not just about speed, power, and luxury. It is also about the vehicles that did the unglamorous, essential, invisible work of daily life. The ones that delivered your letters, brought your bread from the bakery, and carried your packages from the post office to your front door, one overheating stop at a time. The factory where they were built now produces BMWs that cost more than a house. The surviving TLs sell at auction for more than they originally cost to develop. And somewhere in a private collection, a tiny, yellow postal van sits perfectly restored, gleaming under museum lighting, waiting patiently to overheat one more time. So here is the takeaway. The Goggomobil TL overheated constantly, delivered millions of letters, outlived the company that built it, and is now worth more than the luxury cars assembled on its old factory floor. Some stories only get better with time. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the strangest and most charming vehicles in automotive history, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, would you daily drive a Goggomobil TL if you could find one? And what is the most impractical vehicle you have ever loved despite its flaws? Next time, we are looking at another vehicle that was never supposed to be collectible. A car so ordinary in its day that nobody thought to save one, and so rare now that the handful of survivors are worth a fortune. See you then.